Hi and welcome to the Malat Cookery channel. We're just getting into April. I'm receiving some emails now from Malat customers on the different spice blends to use and how to prepare meat, because now is the start of the barbecue season. So one thing I thought I'd do is to actually prepare some short videos, a series of short videos on the very basics of barbecue cooking. So we're going to go right from the start, right from the prep and the spice blends to use on the meat, right the way through, not just to the cooking process on the barbecue, but also beyond that, and give you some good serving suggestions for family barbecues and get-togethers. So the first video in this series, we're going to look at what I call depth of flavour, and this is where a barbecue can actually be won or lost. So when I say depth of flavour, what I'm talking about is your chosen herb and spice mix, your seasoning or your flavouring, to actually go deeper than just the surface of the actual meat themselves and actually penetrate through the layers. Now, three basic parts to that. One is obviously the herb and spice mix that you choose, and if you look at something like the Malat range, there are over 20 herbs and spice blends within that range for all different types of meats and occasions. The second thing is the chemistry part of it, and what I call the vehicle that is used to actually get those flavorings or herbs and spices to penetrate deeper than the surface of the meat. And I say, when I talk about a vehicle, I don't mean something mechanical. We are talking about the chemistry. I promise you I am not going to turn this into a chemistry lesson. However, I do feel that you need to learn the basics in order to produce much better food in the future. And then the third thing is time. And time is dependent on things like the herb and spice mix that you use, the vehicle or the chemistry that you're going to use to penetrate deeper than the surface of the meat, and then also the type of meat that you're cooking with, because different meats have different densities. So the first thing I wanted to do in this short video series is actually have a look at the herb and spice blends and how their makeup and manufacture can actually influence the depth of flavour that we're talking about. So obviously the YouTube channel is a Malat Company YouTube channel, and it's part of an extensive customer service support program for Malat customers. So I've highlighted three of the Malat herb and spice range. However, the principles we talk about here will be the same or similar for almost all herb and spice blends that are out there. So the first spice blend I want to talk about is this, which is Memphis Dust. Now, Memphis Dust is actually the oldest recipe that Malat do. It has its origins dating back to about 1860. The recipe was first published in a Virginia recipe book, and originally Memphis Dust was used on fish, shellfish, and also some delicate meats. Nowadays, Memphis Dust is the go-to rub for ribs. People use it more on ribs than anything else. And the reason for that is you've got a lot of tough meat around the rib itself, and because of its qualities, Memphis Dust is ideal for penetrating that tough meat. Now, the way it's made up is a very finely ground set of herbs and spices, and together with the ingredients, it's this manufacturing process that allows it to give out a very quick release of flavour and penetrate deep into, as I've said, even some of the toughest meats. And that is a good example of how combining the ingredients with the actual process of putting those ingredients together can influence the depth of flavour. Montreal Steakhouse Seasoning is another good example. This is, if you like, the complete opposite to something like Memphis Dust. Montreal Steakhouse Seasoning is a very coarsely ground herb and spice blend. It's designed more as a top dressing seasoning. It's not designed to penetrate deep into the meat, because something like Montreal Steakhouse Seasoning is used on prime steak, where you actually want the flavour of the meat itself, the flavour of the steak, to come out as well. So used as a top dressing, slow release flavours, not designed to penetrate deep into the meat. So it's a complete opposite to something like Memphis Dust. Again, a really good example of where the ingredients and the way they're actually put together can influence the depth of flavour. And the last one that I want to look at is Texas Ranch Barbecue Rib and Steak Rub. And the reason I've got this one out from the Malat range is because this combines all of the great properties of the steakhouse seasoning with all of the great properties of the Memphis dust. And the Texas Ranch is almost like an intermediary. So this is used on ribs and large cuts of red meat, where you do want that depth of flavour, but you also want a certain amount of slow release top dressing. So Texas Ranch combines all of the best qualities of both of these. So these are three really good examples of where the ingredients and the manufacturing process to produce the actual rubs themselves can influence that depth of flavour. So that's the first part of our basic barbecuing journey sorted. When we're looking at a rub or herb and spice mix, we're not just looking at the flavours it can produce, we're looking at actually what we want it to do. Do we want it as a surface dressing, like a steakhouse seasoning, or do we actually want more depth to the flavour within the meat? So the next part is we're going to have a look at the actual vehicle we're going to use, or the chemistry we're going to use to get that depth of flavour. Before I actually go into the vehicles or the chemical reaction we're going to employ to actually get those lovely herb and spice flavours deeper into the meat, just a quick and very basic explanation as to the barrier that stops us from doing that. So the barrier for us as cooks or chefs are protein structures. Now, protein structures can be seen as very tightly packed three-dimensional shapes which allow very little to pass through them. So as cooks, keen on getting that depth of flavour, what we need to do is we need to employ something to disrupt that very tightly packed structure and allow these herb and spice flavours to flow through them. Now, there are different ways to do that, to disrupt these very tightly packed protein structures, and that's what we're going to discuss next. Okay, so the first vehicle or bit of chemistry that we want to actually employ to get some depth of flavour into our meat cuts is salt. When we look at salt as the vehicle to get some depth of flavour into the meat, what we do is we add the salt to our herb and spice mix, and then as the rub is placed onto the meat surface itself, the salt gets drawn into the meat. It splits into two. So you have sodium ions and chloride ions. Now, sodium ions give the salt its saltiness, so that's the seasoning part. The bit we're really interested in for depth of flavour as cooks is the chloride ions. And what they do is they enter these compact protein structures which we've talked about. And because chloride ions are negatively charged, they're repelling each other, they're causing all sorts of chaos. And what they do is they open up tunnels within these compact protein structures, which allows our herb and spice flavours to actually penetrate into the proteins. So the other thing that salt does, which is of real interest to us as cooks, is salt assists that cut of meat to actually retain water molecules during the cooking process. Now, during the cooking process, and we'll go through this in another video, during the cooking process, the cut of meat will actually lose water or moisture, and with the addition of salt, the salt will actually assist that cut of meat to retain more moisture than it would do if it didn't have that salt present. There is another benefit to us as cooks with regard to salt, and that is that salt not only assists that cut of meat to retain moisture, it will also give that cut of meat the ability to take on additional water molecules, and we do that through what's called a brine. So a simple brine is made up of water and salt. So we add some salt to the water and dissolve that. So now we have a solution where when the piece of meat is actually placed into the brine, the salt does the same action as I've already mentioned. It will penetrate those complex protein structures, and it will allow the water molecules from the brine to actually enter those protein structures and in effect swell the meat up and add additional moisture to that meat. So again, when we go onto the barbecue or the cooking process that actually loses moisture, we've actually got a piece of meat there that has more moisture in it at the start of the cooking process than it would have done if it wasn't sat in the brine. Now the other thing we can do to a simple brine is we can actually add our herb and spice mix, and then, as I've said before, with the action of the salt, not only are water molecules now entering these tunnels that are created by the chloride ions, but the flavouring from our herbs and spices. So with a brine where you have your herb and spice mix added, not only do you get that depth of flavour, but you also get the additional bonus of a more moist piece of meat at the end of the cooking process. As long as, of course, the cooking is done correctly, and again we will go through that in another video. So our next vehicle to look at to give us some depth of flavour within our meat cuts are acids. So acids are present in all different foodstuffs, such as dairy products like natural yogurt, in citrus fruits, and also in things like vinegars. And you'll find acids mainly in marinades, such as our Nando style peri peri marinade. Now there is a video on how to make this on our YouTube channel, and when you watch that video you'll see how much of things like vinegars and also citrus juices that are used. Obviously they're there for flavour, but they're also there as this vehicle to try and get some depth of flavour into the actual meat itself. So acids work in a completely different way to salts. Whereas with a salt into something like a dry rub can be left on the surface of the meat for quite a long time, acids into something like a marinade are time critical, and that's because of the way they actually work. So acids work via a process called protein denaturation, and it's exactly the same process that the meat cut goes through during the cooking phase. So the way these acids work is they disrupt these compact protein structures. They create these tunnels again within the protein structures, these spaces that allow for the flavours from the marinade to actually penetrate deeper into the meat and give us that depth of flavour. But because they work using protein denaturation, over time that meat cut will start to lose fluid, start to lose water molecules, and obviously start to dry out. So that's why using a marinade is time critical. So where we use the salt with water to create a simple brine, and then we added our herb and spice mix into that brine, and we got from that our depth of flavour but also added moisture into the meat, we can do exactly the same thing with acids. All we need to do is find a fluid which has acid present. And one of the best ones to use is buttermilk. So if you've ever seen these old recipes from the southern states of the USA on producing fried chicken, you'll see that they always insist on marinating the chicken in buttermilk and herbs and spices. And the reason they use buttermilk and not standard whole milk is because buttermilk has a far higher acidity level than standard whole milk, just because of the way it's produced. So it's the acidity within the buttermilk that creates that depth of flavour, allows those herbs and spices to penetrate deeper into the chicken, and that's why they get much better results using buttermilk than standard whole milk. So the last vehicle or method I want to look at with regard to getting some depth of flavour is heat or cooking. So as we mentioned with using acids, we get this protein denaturation when we actually cook our meat cuts. That disrupts these tight protein structures and allows the flavours from the herbs and spices to penetrate deeper into the actual meat itself. That's why when you get something like a curry from your favourite Indian takeaway and it tastes nice, it always tastes a little bit better the day after, because it's been an additional day where those flavours have been allowed to penetrate deeper into the food. So that's the end of the first video in the series. Just to recap, we've had a look at the dry rubs, the herbs and spices, how creating different granular sizes can result in either quick release of flavours or slow release of flavours. We've also looked at salt as being one of the vehicles we can use for a depth of flavour, how we can add salt into water to create a brine and how that works with regard to the moisture of the meat as well as obviously the depth of flavour. We've had a look at acids, how they're different to salts, how aggressive acids are when used in things like marinades and the time constraints with regard to that, and how we can use acids within liquids to create similar effects to a brine. And very briefly at the end, we've looked at obviously pre-cooking meat and how that can help with depth of flavour. So as usual, if you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. So thanks for watching.